Welcome to the Trumpet of the last few days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Joshua Farrar. And how the tail end of Robert's name managed to cut out with a brand new microphone, I don't really know.
Probably activity settings.
I think it was, probably connectivity.
Well, it could be sensitivity too.
Possibly. It's hard to say.
Shall we try again?
Nah, let it ride.
Let it ride. Let it go.
It's not like making sure all three of us say Farrar matters that much.
Robert Farrar. Robert Farrar.
Oh, don't do that. That sets my teeth on edge. I'm sorry.
What, didn't like dealing with the Bostonians?
No.
He's hardly even met someone from Boston.
Actually, I've met quite a few people from Boston.
As
but
have I.
when it, well, an interesting happening occurred just recently. One of the college's liberal think tanks took and did a poll on the Newsom recall. And they've been tracking for every so often. And after there got to be enough numbers to actually do the recall, well, their poll was only showing 36% of the population of California was in favor of it. Their most recent one was 47%.
That's scary.
With a margin of error of 5%.
That's really scary, especially since you know all the polls lowball it for the in favor of the leftist.
Well, they would have to highball it to be in favor of the leftists.
Well, what they do is all these polls are heavily weighted.
Yeah.
For Democrat voters. So they'll take 2/3 Democrat voters, a portion of independents, and then the rest Republicans, and say that's a fair vote.
Mm-hmm. The fact that they can't even get a majority of Democrats to agree with the Newsom recall shows a lot, actually.
Well, the fact that it's almost 50% of liberal Democrats are willing to take and recall him tells me that he's probably going to get recalled.
Because he's terrible.
He's what?
He's terrible.
Terrible. The process involved, we won't know until November because it has to come to a vote. But the California system is designed to where they can actually manage to get two Democrats running against each other on the election with no Republicans.
Mm.
Though there are some fairly notable Republican candidates vying for it right now.
Yeah. Yes, but if they don't pull more votes in the primaries than what the Democrats pulled in the primary, they don't get put on the bill.
But
only the Democrats.
The recall vote doesn't work that way. I don't.
No, the recall vote does.
Yeah.
But the re-election does.
Yeah. So they may end up with another Republican governor. Haven't had one of those in a
pretty much since Reagan.
Not since Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. And he was.
Schwarzenegger wasn't really a Republican.
Yeah.
He was by title.
Title means nothing.
You're right, though. He was not conservative enough. He was a rhino, like the majority of the spineless wonders calling themselves Republicans that are in office.
Hmm.
Yeah, like Liz
After
Cheney
all,
and Kinzinger, both of
Yeah.
which have been appointed to the January 6th commission that should never have happened.
Oh, that.
yeah, they're still holding people in jail without bond and without a hearing.
For not even committing
More
a
than
crime.
6 months in jail. They haven't even committed a crime. They're being charged with trespassing on public property and vandalism. Okay, fine. Can try them for vandalism. That's the
Those
only
that actually committed.
crime in the bunch. For those who actually committed it.
Yeah.
But they won't take and release the video of what went on inside the Capitol,
Hmm.
even for review from the defense team,
Which is illegal.
which is highly illegal, which means that they're not going to get a fair trial.
Well, we
They're
always
talking
knew
about
they were never going to get a fair
an
trial.
insurrection. They talk about it being an insurrection, but nobody was armed, and the only person that got killed was one of the protesters. Now, if they had have taken and gone in there and shot the place up, or hung the congressman, then it would have been an insurrection.
Yeah. Or
Instead, it
lynching.
was a joke.
But they're not even being tried with insurrection. The media is calling it an insurrection. The congressmen are calling it an insurrection, but they're not being tried with it. Insurrection. They're being tried with trespass. That's a misdemeanor. Vandalism. But because it's vandalism of federal property, they're facing 10 years.
Oh my. You see, I have
10
seen
years for breaking some windows.
some people actually vandalize federal property and get off with a slap on the wrist.
But they're facing 10 years for some broken windows.
Be careful whose windows you break, I guess.
Yeah. Far be it from breaking the windows of our communist overlords.
Yeah. Throw the book
It's
out.
like China. Of course, there's talking about like China. Canada has went so far as to require papers and permissions to travel from one province to another.
What?
Yeah. They're going full commie.
They don't even require papers and permissions to go from Canada to the U.S.
They do now. Thanks to COVID, but yeah, you cannot try. You have to have a written. You have to request permission to cross into the other province. You have to show identity paper. You've got to show proof of inoculation.
It's like they're dividing themselves
All before.
into different countries.
Yeah, it really is.
Yes.
Which is interesting. Quebec
It's
always wanted to be
exactly
a
what
different
it's like.
country.
thing about it is according to to their constitution, freedom of travel is established in their constitution, and yet they don't have the freedom to travel.
Well, freedom of travel is constitutionally guaranteed for us too. They tried to squash that.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of this particular freedom. Kind of been
It's
taking
part
it
of
for
it.
granted.
It's part of interstate commerce. The guarantee of interstate commerce means you have to have a guarantee of freedom of movement.
Huh.
You you have to be so anybody within the United States can travel to any other part of the United States. It's according to their own free will. They can move at will. They can change jobs at will. They can take and work, start a business anywhere in the United States at will, uh, without having to ask by your leave from anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the 80s, is Canada decided, well, we need something similar to the American Constitution. So they wrote their own constitution, and they took some of our laws, watered them, some of our constitutional things, and watered them down, and then put it in theirs. And what I just stated in is part of the Commerce Clause is almost word for word in the Canadian Constitution.
And none of the lawyers in Canada are kicking a fuss up about this?
But what can they do? They have corrupt courts, just like we
Oh, yeah, they have very corrupt courts. Viva Fry had a whole rant on it
Mm-hmm.
because he got stopped going to New Brunswick, and they asked him for his papers, and he said, "What are you talking about?"
because it's illegal for them to ask for their paper.
Yeah.
And they turned him around and made him go through the process. He was not a happy camper.
I imagine.
Which is funny because he was going camping.
He's also now running for parliament.
Kinda hope he makes it.
Same. Though the party he's running for really does sound like a communist.
What's
He's
the
running for
party?
the People's Party of Canada.
That really does sound like something that communists would come up with.
And yet it's their Libertarian Party.
While that is taking place, we find that the number of people coming across the Mexican border illegally that have been tested with COVID has been skyrocketing.
Oh, and they've started, if they do test positive, they've started just letting them go. Well, they've been handing them over to a third-party non-profit organization, then lets them go.
Which puts them on a bus or a plane and flies them to the various parts of the United States without notifying those states they're coming, and turns them loose. While giving them a report date to report to the immigration office
Which they
Nice.
promptly
for a
ignored.
hearing.
I think something like 9% report, that's it. And I'm surprised it's even that high.
Well, those are probably the ones that actually have a legitimate claim for asylum.
Yeah. They estimate that over 1 million
What?
people have come over the border this year.
You know, on a side note that is rather disconnected from this, apparently Biden's approval numbers have been dropping so rapidly that they actually covered it in a whole news segment here in Italy.
Really?
Yeah.
I knew it finally dropped
I-
below 50%.
Oh,
It
it's dropped below 30%,
it dropped
down to 30s.
it dropped all across the board in every category.
From what
Tremendously.
I understand, it was either 32 or 36% was his overall approval rating.
Well, they made the numbers sound a lot more favorable to him than that, but of course they would. But it was pretty bad.
The Hodge twins took and had a discussion on that about how the president with the most those votes in American history has an approval rating in the 30s.
If I recall correctly, that's one of the lowest approval ratings in American history as well.
Now, from what I heard, and this
It
is just
is.
hearsay, they've reestablished the misery index. So, welcome to 70s Redux.
Well,
I was a child the last time.
it was only a matter of time as long as they were pushing this whole "you can't complain, you're white" sort of things. So of course they came up with the misery index.
Except that the misery index started with Carter. But,
Yeah.
I mean, Biden is basically just running Carter's policies. Let's be honest. Carter was a union man, high inflation, high spending, limits on oil, and an oil panic. Huh.
For every dictator on the face of the planet, and anti-American.
Well, see, I don't think Biden is for every dictator on the planet because he can't think well enough to be for every dictator on the planet.
True, and he keeps wanting to pick a war with Russia.
Yeah, I don't understand the fascination of going to war with Russia. It's like they're stuck on an 80s talking, and they just haven't moved past it in the last 40 years.
Well, you know that's kind of normal for somebody who's going through Alzheimer's.
Except it's the entire
They
Democrat Party.
regress backwards. Well, they're all in their 80s, or a bunch of communists, one of the two.
But you'd think the Cold War was still going on the way they talk. We've moved on to that. We're
For
on
them,
China.
it is.
We're on China now, but of course they're all buddy-buddy with
For
China, so...
Remember, the Pelosi's in her. Well, the whole most of the Congress leadership is in there are octogenarian. So they're a bunch of senile old people who think it's still the 70s and 80s. They haven't. Actually, they still think it's the 70s. They haven't even got to the 80s because they are still fighting in the race riots of the 70s.
That they were on the... That they helped stoke, didn't they?
Oh yeah. Every racial problem we've had in this country for the last 200 years has stemmed back to the Democrats. Now, I grant you, Mexico could blame the Democrats for their problems too,
Except Mexico's making bank off of
even though
us.
even though technically the Democrats didn't exist yet. Because when we took and conquered Mexico, there was an argument among the pro-slave factions and the anti-slave faction on whether to keep Mexico because they didn't want to add that many slave states to the United States. because Mexico was a major slaveholder. Well, they chose not to keep from adding that much slave territory. But those pro slavery people became the Democrat Party. The anti slavery faction became the Republican Party.
Huh. Republican Party was born out of the dead
And the
weight
Democrat Party's been
anti-slave
taken.
Democrats.
Mhm. And once you take and look at the situation, the way it's shaped out, well, I take it back. The Democrat Party did exist, and it was a problem within the Democrat Party between the anti-slave Democrats and the pro-slave Democrats.
Yeah, because I was pretty
But
sure it was a
is why
Democrat
we
president
gave
that
Mexico back.
supported the annexation.
It was.
Well, yeah.
It was. It was a Democrat.
Thing is, though, a lot
But
of Mexico's problems are its own creation.
yeah, they are because they went communist.
They went communist and then let the cartels start running half.
Hey, it's cheaper
Well,
to
have
govern a
you ever
country
seen a
that
communist
half
country
the
where
country's being
the
governed for you.
organized? Well, you never see a communist or socialist country where their organized crime doesn't have a major grasp of control.
And it takes a really long time to root it out.
Yeah. Assuming it ever truly gets rooted
Look at
out.
Italy.
I kind of wonder when it comes to Russia and Italy.
I can guarantee you it hasn't been completely rooted out in Italy.
So Sicily is still
And
secretly running everything?
No, they're not as strong as they used to be. In fact, let me tell you offline about a speech I was forced to listen to from a local mayor. That was interesting.
Forced to listen?
Yeah, I was forced to listen, and once again, I will get into that offline.
Now the oligarchs in Russia currently all have connections with organized crime. The oligarchs that run in Ukraine are all connected with organized crime.
It almost sounded like you're going to say Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia doesn't.
Well, I almost had a slip of the tongue there. Yes, but yeah, the Ukraine. But when it comes down to to all those oligarchs and all they're connected to organized crime, it's interesting. They all have connections to Biden too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do. Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, China.
Just about
all
every major union man has been tied to organized crime. The unions themselves are organized crime. The
Yes,
only thing
it's
more
true. The
insidious
unions
than a
are
union is a
organized crime,
homeowners
and have been.
association.
Also organized crime.
Yeah.
Still organized crime.
So here's my question. You know, there's been a lot of speculation about who's been running the country since Biden got office. A lot of the speculation is that various members of the Democrat Party are secretly in charge. But how do we know that it's not secretly mob figures pulling? After all, Biden himself said that he was going to be the most pro-union president in American history.
Well, I would argue that the organized crime has run the Democrat Party since most of the 20th century down to the present day.
Well, there's a lot of speculation that Kennedy had mob ties. No, that Johnson did.
That's a
They,
guaranteed. They've proven Kennedy had mob ties.
that's been proven. In fact, it was proven that that the mob was the ones that cheated and got him elected.
It's speculated
Two
that
things the
because he wasn't
Democrat
listening
Party
to them enough, that they're the ones who got him killed.
No, he did make some objectively good decisions, President.
Well, arguably that was his brother.
Who also happens to share my
Because
first name.
Robert Robert Kennedy took and went after the mob.
How much of that is because he wanted to break away and their slave?
That's very possible because their dad had mob ties. But when you come down to this modern age, you know that we've had a famous president to where anybody who was going to point out the crimes he or his wife was involved with were Arkancided.
Yeah, but
And
it's just weird to think of somebody from Arkansas with mob. Let's be honest.
yeah,
I'm not saying it's impossible.
but he
It's
did
just weird to think about.
he did go to Yale though.
I mean, you can't go to Hot Springs and seriously tell me that's not being run by a cartel.
Well, okay, let's be honest. You got Al Capone, went to Hot Spring. What's his name? Bugsy. He fled to Hot
Bugs
Spring.
Moran.
Well, yeah. He fled to Hot Springs when the law was after.
Or Bugsy Siegel. Which one?
Bugsy Siegel.
Bugs Moran or Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy Siegel fled to Hot Springs when the law was after him. So yeah, I guess Arkansas does have a history of mob ties.
I mean, you just have to go to Hot Springs once. You don't even have to know anything. Look around and see that tourist trap, and you know it's run by the mob.
And it is a tourist
Except for
trap.
most of that's government.
Yeah.
Most of that's federal.
Yep.
But
There isn't much difference between most
looking at
federal
the
governments and the mob these days, anyway.
But when you're taking a think about it, okay, a honest election. What happens when states try to make their elections where people have more difficulty cheating? The Democrats do their best to stop it. They threaten Georgia with legal action. They take and threaten Arizona with legal action for doing a recount. They take and have been threatening all kinds of legal actions against the states that are checking into corruption. Anything that would prove the election was a fraud, they attack. Texas is trying to tighten down its elections to make it more difficult for fraud. And so what happens? The Democrats flee to D.C.,
Any new developments
taking
on that, by the way?
COVID with them.
There has been at least one arrest warrant signed.
Yes. And if they had have done what they were going to, what they said, if he had have done what he said he was going to do to begin with, that would have already been taken care of. The man returned to the state of Texas. Then they gave him permission to leave the floor of the Congress, and because he had to have permission to leave, and he fled the state again. So they put out an arrest warrant on him. They should have arrested him just as soon as he stepped foot in Texas, like they said they were going to do. Then he would have been in jail. He would have gone from the floor of the Congress right into the jail cell, and they would have known exactly where he was.
politics.
I still say they need to send an arrest warrant to Virginia, have them, to D.C., have them arrested and extradited back to Texas. They're complaining public fraud right now.
Mm-hmm.
They were they were hired to do a job they said they were going to do. They made claims that they would do certain things, and they instead have taken and left the state and are begging for people to take and support them, despite making over $100,000 a year here while in D.C.
Well, I mean, Governor Abbott did line item veto their pay.
Well, at least that happened.
Good.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
That's an important first step.
It
Doesn't
is.
matter much when they're living off of their rich
Yes.
friends, but it's an important first step.
They have put up a one of those GoFundMe pages requesting funds and to trying to get a Dr. Pepper, candy,
They're going after
clothes.
scholarships? Oh no, sponsorships?
Yes.
You know,
It's
there was an interesting idea that I saw on the internet a while back. And they suggested that congressmen and the like should wear like those NASCAR jackets that have all of your sponsors on it, so at least we know who they're actually voting for.
Who they're illegally receiving money from.
Yeah.
Because that's all that lobbying is bribery. It's a
Legalized
violation of
bribery,
bribery
yeah.
law.
it has been suggested that they ought to go back to the way it was in the early 1800s, where Congress didn't get paid.
In fact, make it illegal for them to get paid at all from anything but their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
No source of income
But see,
for
they
their
had to.
congressional work.
Yeah. No donation. Can't donate money to them for them to run for Congress. So they can't have a congressional slush fund for running. No salary for being in office. That's the way it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to have a job that could support them when Congress was not in session. Enough to, and of course, I grant you the Congress's sessions were pretty short because
Because they had to go
they
work.
couldn't afford to stay there all the time, yeah.
right.
These days, they're always in session. Pretty much.
Well, they're
much.
making more than most corporate executives.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
They
the amount,
are the fat cats.
the amount that Pelosi makes alone insider trading, which is legal for them, by the way.
Didn't used to be.
Didn't used to be, but they rewrote the law, legalizing
Of
them,
course
and
they did.
specifically them, to practice insider trading.
Of
Well,
course they did.
That's the thing about it is I could see it just turning out like China, where they are allowed to get by with it until they make the party mad, and then the party turns on them.
Yeah.
I still
That's-
They're
think
all
though,
China.
That's an inevitability, and we can't afford to wait for that to happen while they destroy the nation around us.
Correct.
I think it may be too late. I think all this secession talk needs to stop, and if they're gonna do it, they should put their money where their mouth.
Oh, I've held that standpoint for a while. I don't think secession talk is enough. I think they should have already done it. I think they're too late.
Oh, I do too. No, they're not too late, but they need to do it. Quit the talk and get it. Put bullets in the guns and go and step forward.
Hmm.
But most of the politicians are cowards.
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
You know the guy who wrote the Red Badge of Courage?
Yeah,
I
Jonathan
know
Crane.
of him. I
Or
don't
is it
know his
Stephen Crane?
name.
No, I think
He stated the that in America, courage was the norm, cowardice was the exception.
If
that's
only
not
that
My,
was still
things have
true.
sure changed.
150 years later.
Cowardice is the norm, and courage is the exception.
Remember, this is the guy who fought in the Spanish-American War. And they had some pretty ugly battles in that war.
Yeah,
Though you have to admit, we did mop the floor.
yeah, we shouldn't have given Cuba back either.
No, we never should have given Cuba back. I hope Cuba. I really hope the best. But you know, you give up your guns, and this is what happens.
You know, the Cubans have really confused American college.
Why? Because they don't like communism?
It's because they think
Whoa.
everyone
They
in
don't.
Cuba is Che Guevara.
Yeah,
A
they
psychopath?
they
A racist
honest
psychopath, yeah.
they
The liberal hero,
they
the
honestly
racist
expect
psychopath.
that everybody in Cuba they expect everybody in Cuba to be just wanting reforms in their communist country. They don't understand why on earth they'd be carrying American flags and demanding liberty and freedom.
It's almost communism. Terrible.
They also don't understand why on earth the people in Hong Kong are protesting this new law that is sending people to prison for opposing the communist regime
Well,
and actually going out and waving American flags in Hong Kong.
sadly, they're not anymore.
Yeah, it's
Hong
true.
Kong's been thoroughly crushed now. There's no.
Oh yeah. And they just recently took and put a man in prison for running over policemen at one of the protests with his motorcycle.
Ah. Wait, that was a while ago, though, wasn't
When he did it was a while ago.
it? Yeah.
They just now sentenced him to 10 years.
Oh, I'm surprised.
No.
He got off light.
Longer than that. They said he's facing life.
And, you know, look what happens.
They,
Don't have guns.
yeah. That's what we need to be exporting to Hong Kong is guns.
We need to be exporting it to Cuba and Hong Kong both.
That's true. The a billionaire in Hong Kong recently took and got arrested and is facing 10 years to life for treason to the government because he publicly spoke out against the communist economy for the foreign press.
Hmm.
Smart man. Smart man.
Not smart enough if he got caught.
Well, I mean, somebody needs to do it.
It came out over the news, so of course he got caught. He thought he had powerful enough friends to avoid having to pay the consequences.
Like I said, not smart enough.
But China doesn't care anything about their people. They only care about what outsiders think of them. So when it comes down to it, they the majority of the population is receiving money from the state. That's one of the ways they control them. So they took and go through and to reduce the roles of people that are receiving money from the state, especially with an elderly population, they have to kill people off. Well,
Hmm.
you see, they've picked out various groups that they've isolated off and locked up and harvested their organs and killed them.
Like the Uyghurs, yeah.
And then they've taken and the rainy season hit, the flooding started. So what do? They they take and start tearing out the levees to let the water in on the city. Within minutes, their subways were submerged with water, and they said, "Oh, well, 14." Everybody was rescued except 14. We only lost 14 people. Yet there's hundreds that are
That were
missing.
still down there when they said that.
Yeah,
That were
still down there
actively
when they said that,
messaging.
and most of them died. But China won't admit they even perished. A roadblock, a toll tunnel where you had to go underneath the tunnel. When you went through the tunnel, you got to the other side, you had to pay a toll. The whole roadway was blocked because of that toll road, and the tunnel flooded. They wouldn't let people out of the tunnel because they hadn't paid the toll, so they died.
Of course they did. And you know, the really disgusting thing is American liberals are pointing to that as an example of climate change
Mhm.
instead of arson.
Well, actually, in that particular case, it was flooding. But
Isn't arson just
you take
destruction
a look at
of property?
the
I didn't think it had to be by fire.
no, arson's by fire, vandalism, destruction of property.
I thought vandalism was defacing property while
They,
arson was destruction of it.
vandalism can be both destruction and defacing.
Okay.
But they took heavy equipment because people pulled their cars up to protect the river embankment, keep them from destroying it and flooding the area. They took heavy equipment and crushed their cars and drug them out of the way, and then destroyed the river embankment.
Mm-hmm.
And those levees are to keep the river in its bank, so it doesn't come outside the bank, and they're destroying the levees.
Yeah.
They opened up dams without any warning and flooded the lower area.
So are they just trying to wipe their people out?
They're trying to
It
reduce their
seems that way.
population so that they don't have to feed as much. Because they're not
Well,
producing enough food.
but it doesn't make much sense because they've also at the same time established the three-child policy so that they can get some population growth.
They want the younger people to grow, but they want the older people to take and die. Well, the likelihood of the older ones dying is much higher than the younger. But then again, in those subways and tunnels, everybody dies.
Yeah, but they're willing to pay the price to remove the unwanted, the untouchables.
They've had 3 dams that have collapsed because of shoddy building. Every year they seem to lose another dam. I'm wondering when the Three Gorges is going to go.
It almost
What was that?
it almost went
Uh,
last.
yeah, it almost went last year.
It was described as deformed, still holding.
Oh yeah, you could see pictures of it, and it bulging and leaning out, but it held.
Which is
But the
impressive.
maker
We
of it
got a
says it's
lot
a
of
matter
water
of
last
time.
year. But this year they seem to be getting
Yeah.
even more.
Mhm. But the builder of the dam said it was just a matter of time before it goes.
Hmm.
Well, the guy who took and first surveyed the area when they were considering building a dam, he said they should never build a dam there. It's on an earthquake fault.
And they went and did it anyway.
He says it's not if it'll collapse, it's when will it collapse. And there's several cities of multi millions below it. Watching one video, the the cars were being swept down the road. It looked like a river, but it was the road. And this one guy dove into the water and grabbed this one guy who was drowning and put him up onto a car. So the floating car would help keep him out of the water so he wouldn't drown.
Well, that's respectable on his part.
But it's people like that that are rescuing people. The government who is doing nothing. There are people taking their own private inflatable boats down and going in and bringing people out.
Well, libertarians would say that's great. Great that the government's doing that. Keep them out of it.
Well, I would say that under a normal circumstance, that would be great. Except for under a communist regime, people are afraid to do anything unless they have governmental permission. They didn't let the people out of the subways because the government hadn't given them clearance, and it was working its way up through the bureaucracy, and that's why so many people drowned because nobody was willing to take a
No
it
one was
on
able to,
themselves
yeah,
to.
take the personal risk. It's the same reason why we beat the British in the Revolutionary War, because they didn't have anyone willing to step up and take the place of an officer because they were too cowed.
That's funny because the British beat the Chinese because in the Opium Wars because none of them were willing to take the risk.
That's what happens when you have a totalitarian government that is ruled from the top down. People are not used to thinking for themselves. And that's really what the left in this country wants. This episode has had the least humor of any episode we've done so far.
True,
They took out our funny bone.
but
Still waiting on it to be put
if we
back.
really wanted to talk about a joke, we would have been discussing the Olympics.
That's true. I was just thinking, one of the things that I normally put on here is that it's politics and comedy. We have no comedy this time, but we didn't cover the Olympics.
I am inclined to
Talk about
believe.
all
I am inclined to
wrong.
believe that the Olympics is an outdated institution that shouldn't have been revived after Greece.
I agree with that. It's
Well, yeah, definitely.
You can have other big sports competitions without.
it's a waste of money. It's political posturing and propaganda. That's all it exists for.
Yeah.
Have you noticed all the interference in the Olympics?
I noticed some interference. Like I noticed that that Russia was technically banned, but they're competing anyway, and their scores are being counted. I heard about that American gymnast who none of her scores were being counted because she was doing things that no one else could do, and therefore she just quit wholesale. Because why
Which I
bother
don't
if her
blame.
scores aren't being counted? Um, I heard that Taiwan
Well,
wasn't allowed to go under their own name, or wield their own flag. It's a lot of stuff going on.
reporters took boats and blocked part of the swimmers in the triathlon.
Yeah. Well, at least one boat. I only heard about one boat. But they
Well,
had
the report I had heard was more than one. But
they had to
Wouldn't that
yeah,
declare a
nullify
false
the
start.
results of the competition?
They had to declare a false start and restart the competition.
a a person crossed the BMX track dur- during a trial run and got hit by the bicycle
There aren't
coming out
Serves
from
him
one of those
right.
major jumps.
there aren't even supposed to be any spectators to these games. Japan declared there would be no spectators. Who are these people?
Reporters and representatives of various countries.
With
That just makes
no
it all the
sense.
more obvious that it's intentional meddling.
Yeah,
Random
but
people do
because of
that as a stunt for either attention or because they're stupid or because they're drunk. There's a lot of reasons why random people do things like that. But reporters and delegates, there is no excuse.
now with that triathlon, uh, they almost killed the runners in it because they had to take and push that much harder to complete the time because some actually were still going while the others had to come back and restart.
Hmm.
The guy who won the deal puked his guts up right
That's
after
impressive
finishing
as an athlete, though. You got to give him props for that.
Yeah, but their interference actually uh, prevented a fair race.
But I
It
think
wasn't a complete restart.
Hmm.
They
the,
only
the
restarted part of them.
the International Olympic Committee has ruined its reputation time and time again. And yet people keep coming back. I think it may be near its end.
Well, I for one have just completely stopped watching the Olympics.
Uh,
I didn't like the Olympics when Mom liked
It's
watching it back in the day, but now I've just completely stopped watching altogether.
There there are certain events that I like. I like watching the fence. Fencing is cool. It's
Uh,
impressive to watch.
It is impressive seeing them put all those nails to that wood so rapidly, and if the foundation is proper, then you know you've got a good and fast fencer.
You've never seen such skilled fencing in all your life. Doesn't matter. Wood, chain link, ornamental iron.
It's even more
they
impressive
blow
if they're
through it.
going for the difficult barbed wire fencing. That is that is an impressive feat to behold.
Especially once they let the herd loose while they're still in progress, just to make things more challenging.
Yeah, but I'm told they're not allowed to use cameras for the privacy fencing. It's it's a very delicate procedure, I hear.
They haven't started doing the deer fencing yet. I hear that's a tall order.
On a side note, I hear the champions can get a guaranteed job down in Texas or Arizona as soon as the Olympics are done.
But in all seriousness, the objective sports are far more entertaining than the subjective sports. So anything So like
So, like the
BMX,
gymnastics groups and that sort of thing, that you can never really tell if they're doing better or not. You're just being told that they're better by some snooty judge who thinks who thinks their farts don't smell, and
One positive thing that took place in this Olympics, some of the women took and decided to violate the uniform rules and wear more decent shorts and more and the gymnastics insisted on more decent unitards than normal.
yeah, that
I
is
can
possible.
approve of that. I didn't
But
know there was a uniform standard behind that was requiring them to.
yeah, there actually was.
In one of the beach competitions, the women of one country got fined for wearing shorts instead of bikini bottoms.
That's just retarded. And shorts are objectively better in
But
every way for a sport like that.
they were wearing shorts like the men wear.
Yeah. Then
And
again, everyone knows that
what
people don't watch volleyball for the volleyball.
thing about it is the whole point of Olympics is supposed to be for the sports, not for the audience.
Yeah,
And
but
there's no audience
let's
here
be
anyway.
honest, the female portion of the Olympics is just there to bring in more money. They're not there to really compete. They can't beat the men at practically anything. They're there just to bring in money.
Well, okay, let's be honest though. Historically, there was a women's section of the in the original Olympics
No,
where
there
the
was.
women.
Women weren't even allowed in the women weren't even allowed in the stadium
They weren't even allowed to be a spectator.
because
Were they not?
because the
They
men
were not.
participated in the nude. No, they were not allowed
Well,
because the men participated in the nude. The women
well, I know
weren't even
that
allowed in to be a spectator.
I know that the Spartans had
Oh.
females.
The Spartans did not
They
participate in the Athenian Olympics.
But the Athenian Olympics was supposed to gather all of the Hellenes, which admittedly the Spartans weren't Hellenes.
Robert, you know way too much about politics to believe they actually followed that.
thing about it is that when it comes down to it, historically speaking, there was a woman that took and snuck into the dressed as a man and snuck into the Olympics. She got caught. You know what the penalty was?
Didn't they
Death.
execute her?
Death. Yes, they executed. They may have had female sports, but they not in the Olympics.
So that was see how well the men could do it.
But the Olympics also had boxing, wrestling, um, various other combat sports in it too.
Wrestling and karate are still in the Olympics, as far as I'm
So
aware.
is boxing not any?
So is boxing.
Did they take
Boxing
it?
might
Yeah.
be, but
still
I've
in
never
it.
actually seen them air the matches.
They never televise the good stuff. They always televise the most boring sports they can.
Like track and field. Who actually likes watching track and field?
Well, it's
Their families.
not a good spectator sport.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
It's something you participate in. That's where the enjoyment is. Not
Well, you take. They tend not to show boxing, taekwondo, wrestling.
All this stuff that
Karate,
could
judo.
actually bring in an audience off of their own merit.
yes.
Yeah,
Fencing
all
they don't
those are in the
usually
Olympics.
show. You've got to go out and look for all of those.
But all those have a clear-cut winner.
They will do
The
wrestling, though. I'll
person
give
that's
them
still
that.
standing won.
Yeah.
That's true. But yeah, but with most of those others, the person who's still standing won. Judo's like wrestling, but
And why on earth, every Winter Olympics, do they decide that it's a good idea to televise a bunch of people going cross country with skis, shooting at a target, and then continuing on their way on their skis? That is not interesting viewing.
no, but it would be interesting to do.
Oh, it would be very interesting to participate in.
There are a lot of
But to watch.
non-spectator sports out there. It's like cross.
It's like curling.
It's like the marathon. Yeah, like. But
This year we decided we're going to spice up the Winter Olympics. Now the cross country shooting team will now have live targets.
And landmines.
That would spice it. Well, if you, the audience, need some entertainment, you could probably get a good laugh out of the Olympics this year. We probably will boycott it.
Hey, I've been trying to boycott it for years, but people keep turning the thing on.
Only the biggest sporting event of the world.
I've never liked the Olympics.
But if you like this episode and find it to be more entertaining than the Olympics, we're flattered. Though, to be honest, it might not be hard to be more entertaining than the Olympics for the most part.
True. The Macy's Day Thanksgiving parade is more interesting than the Olympics, and that's as dull as watching paint dry. And you always know they're going to try to one-up themselves with that whole dog show immediately afterward that is just as dull.
And the Husky never wins when Huskies are one of the best dogs out there. But, if you like this episode, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, and catch us on our next video. Bye!